All right, welcome back. So in the last lesson, we learned how to implement the validation stuff using a combination of Spring's validation support and Bootstrap's own validation support to decorate these widgets when there are errors. And that all looks great. So in this lesson, we're going to do two things. First, I have a couple minor additional things that I want to do cosmetically here, and that won't take long at all. And then we're going to proceed with learning another one of the major CRUD operations, which is delete. We need to implement a way to delete records, right? Delete rows out of this table. For example, we've got these 3 dummy rows here with no data actually in them, and we need a good way to get rid of those. So we're going to learn how to do all of that. So first off, let's address a couple more issues that I have here. I still don't like quite how scrunched up this table is. And one thing that I want to try doing here is to just change the width a little bit more of the table. And so right here where we had this div, which is encapsulating the table and the form, and we've got this column small 10 right here. I want to see what that looks like if we set that to 11. Oh yeah, see, and that's even a little bit better. And then if we come over here and drag this out, then it breaks back out though into the wider display. So yeah, I kind of like that even better. All right, so that's one thing I wanted to do. Then another trick that we could also do is we could also make some of the columns of this table actually just disappear if the width of the browser is too narrow. So let me show you real quick how to do that also. So we'll need to do some little bit of magic both on the table header. Now I'm going to pick the email column here just randomly. That's just the column I want. I could do this on any of the columns or all of them or whatever, but I'm going to pick the email column. And so we're going to do that header, and then we'll do the data rows as well. So first let's find the email header, which is right here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use a Bootstrap mechanism. I'm not going to bother going and showing you where it is in the Bootstrap documentation. You can search for that, but basically we're going to add a class to this header. And the trick here is to use the class called D hyphen, and then we're going to set the breakpoint size, which will be small. And then if we want the email header to just disappear when we are small, then we will say none, okay? Like that. And then if we're going to do that though, then we also need to specify how it should be when we're not small. So for that, we'll do a D hyphen medium hyphen, and then I can specify something like table cell, okay, like so. And then I will grab all of that, and we will do this again on the email field in the data rows. Okay, so I'll put my cursor right there, space, and then just paste all of that. All right, so let's refresh and see that the email column hopefully will disappear. Yep, there it is. Look at that, it went away. But now if we come over here and we expand this window, there it is. See, then it pops back in. So when we're wide, we get that email column, but when we're collapsed, right at the breakpoint, there it is, then it disappears. And so then we get even more, real estate there. So you can use that kind of trick also to make various things disappear when you're a little too small or whatever, okay? Or when the window is a little too narrow, okay? All right, so that's enough of the cosmetic stuff, I think, for this lesson. So now we're going to get on to the big thing here, which is how can we enable ourselves to delete rows from the table? And really what I mean is delete data or records from the database, right? How can we do that? So what I have in mind here is to make it so that we can select rows for deletion. And the way I'm going to do this is to add one more column here with a checkbox, okay? So we'll add a checkbox column. So the way we can do that is, first off, we'll decide where we want this checkbox to be. And I'm thinking maybe we'll add another column right before the ID column here, which is this column right here, right? So we'll add a table data element right here. By the way, you may have noticed that the ID table cells here are using this TH. That stands for table header. The reason that's being used here is really just to make these IDs bold. And I didn't choose that. That was the example I think that we got when I copied this, the template for this. So that's just how they decided to make things, and I didn't bother to change it. So in case you were just wondering, why is there a TH there, but everything else is a TD. All right. And then to get a checkbox, what we will use is the HTML input element, which we have seen right there. So we're going to use one of these again. However, we'll tell it that we want it to be a checkbox. And the way we can do that, in fact, here, let me just close that off first. Okay, so the way we can do this is with a type attribute. And there we get to see all the different types of input elements that exist. And there is a checkbox one, okay? So we can have a checkbox there. And I'm going to stop right there for right now. We'll come back to this, but I just realized that I forgot to put the actual header in here also. So up here in the header section for the table header, let's also add a column in here. So we'll do a TH, and I should have just copied the what's already there, really. And I don't know, we'll just call this select, I guess. All right, so let's just refresh and see what we've got so far. Okay, yeah, that works. We could possibly play around with the spacing a little bit, but for right now, I think that'll work. All right, so we've got our checkboxes there. Now, obviously, you can pretty much guess these checkboxes aren't going to do anything for us right now. I mean, we can come over here and we can select them, but we don't even have any way to trigger a deletion to occur yet, right? So we need a way to actually say, go delete the things that we've selected here. And I think the easiest thing to do there is just to put a button down here below this table, like a button that says delete, okay? So let's see what that might look like. So right below that table, let's make a button. Now for this, I do want to jump back over to the Bootstrap documentation, and we will look at components, buttons. Okay, and let's see what our options are for buttons. Okay, so here are some nice looking buttons for display purposes or whatever. And so in fact, what I think I will do is just copy one. And I'm thinking to delete, I want a nice red button, okay? So I'm going to copy the example of that, which is called danger. So that would be this one right here. So I will just copy that button for starters. All right. And I'm going to paste that right there and then jump back over here. And let's just see how that looks, first of all. All right, yeah, that's okay. I am eventually going to want to have some space. In fact, let's see if we could put a little space there right now. So let's do like a margin bottom -5. Let's see if this will give us the space that, yeah, cool. All right, so that gives a little space there. All right, so yeah, I think I'm okay with that. And then we'll change its name from danger to delete. Okay, cool. Now we just need a way to make it so that when we select some of these and then click the delete button, that it does something. So I'm clicking on it right now and it's doing nothing. And that makes sense because I haven't connected it to any type of functionality, right? So the way that we can make this work is actually pretty much what we did for our form down here. Basically, we're going to turn this table into a form essentially, so that when we click the button, in our case up here would be the delete button, but when we click that button, it submits some data from the form, okay? And the form will just be these checkboxes here, all right? So the key to doing that is really just to wrap the table, including the button, inside of another form element here, all right? All right. And in fact, the next thing I think I will do is to select all of that all the way up to this table. And then I'm going to just do an Option Command T to surround and then choose T. And then, so I will just type form for now and then hit return. And let's see if that put the closing? Yes, it did. Okay, so it gave me a closing form there. So now I will just copy the rest of this that way. Come back up here, paste all of that like so. All right, now the form that we have down here has tied each of its fields to the person object that is in the model, right? But in this particular case for the table, we don't have a model, and all we're really wanting is just these checkboxes here anyway. So we're going to do this a little differently. In this particular case, we're not going to specify an object at all. And we don't need this no validate business either, okay? And what we will do instead, well, actually, you'll see in just a moment, okay? So now we're going to come down here to our new checkbox and finish fleshing this out a bit. We need to specify a few more things here. As you may recall, in our form here, each of these fields got a name, and that was part of the ID, right? So yeah, like first name and blah, blah, blah. And when we submitted this form and we looked at the request that the browser was building, we saw that each of these fields was being sent back with whatever value was in it in text form as a text string, basically. So we want to have something similar to that happen with our checkboxes as well. So these checkboxes are going to need to have an ID or some kind of a name or something like that. So what we can do is we can just specify a name. And we're going to do this in kind of an interesting way. So let's say that we were to call these checkboxes something like selections. Okay, let's do that. And then they're going to need a value, right? So for the value now, we can use a Thymeleaf attribute, th:value. And the reason I'm using a Thymeleaf attribute instead of just hard coding something like I did here for name is because I want this value here of the checkbox to be the ID of the person that we're iterating over, okay? So in other words, for each of these rows, if you were to click on any of these checkboxes, that checkbox would be associated with a value, and the value that I want is just the ID. And the reason I want the ID is because that's something that I know is going to be unique, okay? So the way I can do that is simply the same way that we're doing it down here. In fact, I can just copy this. I can copy that and paste it right there, okay? So all I'm saying is whenever someone checks one of these checkboxes for any given row, that's going to send back the ID as the value for that particular checkbox. And you'll see what I mean more specifically in just a minute here, okay? So that's how we'll get the values for each of these. Oh, and then one more thing. We can also decorate these checkboxes a little bit. So if we come over here, let's see, we can see some examples of a checkbox somewhere in here. Let's see, maybe we have to go into the forms. There we go, checks and radios. There we go. Checks. So let's see. Okay, so yes, Bootstrap does have some custom decorations for a checkbox. So let's grab that. Okay, and we'll add that. I'll just put it anywhere. It doesn't matter where you put these attributes. Class. Paste all of that, jump back over here, and let's see, there will likely be a subtle difference in how that looks. Okay, yeah, they're rounded, a little bit rounded, and a little bit bigger. That looks like the main difference there, okay? And what else? Oh, okay, and then also let me just explain now what I was doing with this form. So this form here doesn't have an object attribute on it, the th::object, and it really has nothing other than just the method. And so what'll happen here is that by default, if you don't specify any of that kind of stuff on a form, then the form will try to submit back to wherever its page came from. So in other words, this page is loading from the /people path or resource. And so when I click this button, by default, this form is going to try to post back to the /people path, which we already know is going to end up going back to our controller, okay? but it's going to go back to a method that is annotated with post mapping, which right now would be this save method here. Now that's going to be a problem. That's definitely going to be a problem, but we're going to address that in just a moment also. But I wanted to explain what that's going to do by default, okay? All right, so let's make a few minor changes to this button. So let's change its type from button to submit. And we will add a couple of attributes. Let's add a name to it and let's call it delete. And let's also set a value to true. Okay, so let's refresh. Okay, cool. So it still looks the same. So now I'm going to open up the developer tools and I'm going to select these 3 blank records here and hit delete so that we can examine what actually will be sent back to the controller. All right, so I just clicked on that and now I will click on the people request that we just built here. And if I click on payload, so look at that. So what happened is we got these 3 rows. In fact, let's look at the raw, at kind of the raw view of this. This is kind of more realistic of what's actually going to be sent back. So you can see here that we got selections equals 3 and selections equals 4 and selections equals 5 and delete equals true. Okay, so why did I have you add the delete name? Because that's where that delete is coming from, and the value of true. Well, let me show you why. So let's jump over to the controller. And you already know that by default now, when we click this delete button here, the request is going to, by default, try to be routed to any method we have on this class that has a post mapping on it, okay? And the problem there is that we don't want this delete button to result in calling the save person method. In fact, we want to have a new method for deleting people. So let's go ahead and just start writing that method, okay? And then I will show you how we can differentiate between those 2 calls. So let's make a public string delete people method right here, okay? And for now, we'll just return another redirect back to people again, whenever that is successful, okay? However, in order to tell Spring MVC that we want this method to be called when we hit this delete button here, what we're going to do is a variation on the post mapping. So we will add a post mapping here, just as we did before. However, we will additionally add an attribute called params, which stands for parameters, okay? And in this, we can actually specify delete equals true. So in other words, what this will do is when Spring MVC is trying to figure out which method to call for a given request, this will help Spring MVC to match this particular request. In other words, it's going to say, if I receive a request that has a parameter of delete with a value of true, then this method is the method that I should call instead of this one up here. That's what this is for. So we're just using this as a way to differentiate one call from another call, essentially, okay? That's what that's for. And then the other thing we're gonna do now is how do we actually get our hands on this data here, right? So there's some cool things we can do for that. So what we will do is we can actually map these selections here, since they all have the same name. That's basically kind of like an array. And so we can map that kind of a pattern where you've got this repeated, the same name, but with different values. We can map that to a few different things, but one of the things we can map it to is a list. We can map that to a list of longs. Okay, now we could make that anything really, a list of integers, a list of longs. We could make it an array of longs. Spring MVC would figure out the right thing to do with any of those combinations because it's pretty smart. All right, and so I will call this selections so that it matches up with the parameter here that we're sending in. Okay, and then for right now, I'm just going to print out those selections, okay? Just like that. All right, and then one more thing that we will need to make this all work. We will need to help Spring MVC to match up these parameters that are named selections to this parameter here called selections, okay? And the way that we can do that is with an annotation at request param, just like that, okay? And that's really all we need. So as long as the parameters coming in are named the same thing as this parameter here in the method, then Spring MVC will be able to match those up just fine. If they did not match, that wouldn't be a problem. We could alternatively specify what they are called over here. So if they were called checkboxes, for example, then we'd say checkboxes here, and then we could call them whatever we want to over here, okay? But if they have the same name, then I don't even need to specify the parameter name there, all right? All right, and let's see. So let's refresh again. Okay, so now let's try this out. So if I select these 3 rows and hit delete, in fact, hold on a second, let me clear this out just so I don't have to parse everything out. So I hit delete, look at that, 3, 4, and 5. And then we see Hibernate doing its database query to go grab the data from the database again, because we're doing a redirect, okay, after all of that is done. But here's what I wanted to see was these numbers, 3, 4, and 5. So now we can see that we are actually receiving these values. Now let me show you something though. We're not quite done yet. Let me clear this out one more time. Now, if I were to not select anything and then hit delete, let's see what happens. It blows up. And let's see if we get a message. So there we go. Required request parameter selections for method parameter type list is not present. So basically it's just saying that if we don't actually send any parameters at all called selections, then Spring MVC doesn't know what to do with this. And it's kind of confused. It's not going to just be empty. It's just not going to get populated at all, and that's kind of a problem. So there are 2 ways, at least 2 ways that we can fix that. One way that I will show you real quick is we can actually supply an option to this request parameter, which is called required. So we can say required equals false. We could do that, and then Spring would allow this selections variable here to be null when you don't have anything selected, okay? So that's one way we could do that, but we don't like nulls, right? We learned how to do cooler things than to deal with nulls. So alternatively, we could instead wrap this list in an optional. So we could say that this is an optional of a list of longs, like so. Let me import that. And by having the optional here, Spring will now tolerate this scenario where we don't have anything selected and the selections will just be an empty optional, okay? So let's take a look at that real quick. So I'm gonna restart everything. And it actually already resubmitted the previous request with no checkboxes selected. And now we see that we got back an optional empty on line 50. When this systemout.println executed, that's what we got back out. And so now if I select 4 and hit delete, there's the 4. Or if I do 3 and 4 and hit delete, there's the 3 and the 4. And then if I do nothing, then I get an optional empty, right? So that is what we want. And now we're ready to go ahead and actually delete some stuff. So how do we do that now? Well, that should be actually pretty easy. If we reference the person repository, there will be an inherited method on here. Let's see, delete. We've got delete, where we can pass in a person. We've got delete all, which we definitely don't want. We've got delete all, where we could pass in basically a collection of people. Or we've got delete by ID, or we've got delete all by ID. And that's the one that I think we actually will want here, delete all by ID. So let's choose that. So what I'm thinking we can do here is really just wrap this in a conditional. So we'll do an if, and we'll say if selections is present, Then simply say selections.get. And there we go. I think that should be it. So let's go ahead and restart. And now let's see what happens if we delete just one of these. So 3. Hey, look, it's gone. You see that? It's actually gone. And then 4 and 5. Let's get rid of both of those at the same time. There we go. And so now we've got rows actually going away. And we can see down here, Hibernate is actually executing SQL to say delete from person where ID equals blah, blah, blah. And that is exactly what we wanted. And let's get rid of 2 more. These 2 right here. In fact, let me clear that out. I kind of want to pay more attention to it, okay? So we'll get rid of these 2. There we go. Now, it's interesting to me that Hibernate is doing this in a particular way. It's actually doing one delete at a time. I would have thought that it would have used an in clause to do like a delete from person where ID in, and then it would pass in all the IDs, but it's not doing that. I'm okay with this for right now. But that's something interesting to pay attention to. And that's one of the reasons why you sometimes do want to really analyze what is Hibernate generating for the SQL and make sure that it is what you were expecting it to be. If we were allowing ourselves to delete thousands or, thousands or tens of thousands of records by ID, we almost certainly wouldn't want to do it in this way where it has to do each deletion one at a time like this. That's probably not good. Now, most databases will only allow you to use an in clause up to like 100,000 or 1,024 parameters in an in clause. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I think I did briefly touch on in clauses in the database section, but you can go back there and look it up, or you can just Google it. All right, so anyway, I think we're done here. I think we've got the delete functionality working, and it's working pretty nicely, I'd say, for the most part. I'm pretty happy with it. So now we've got the ability to display records in the table, add new records, and now we can delete them as well. And so the only remaining part of CRUD is the update, right? We need a way to basically edit a record now. So let's go ahead and implement that in the next lesson, and I will see you there. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.